welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at sources that are, well, fundamentally rewriting how we think about human evolution, those old textbook chapters about early Americans, Neanderthal features. They're being replaced by this really dynamic, complex, sometimes, frankly, shocking new picture from genetics and computer modeling.
That's right. We've got two fascinating topics today, seemingly quite different, but they share a core theme. How humans adapted, migrated, survived, or sometimes didn't survive, vanished in prehistory.
Okay.
And the sources, they pull from all over. Ancient DNA studies, especially those looking at the maternal and paternal lines, the mtDNA and Y chromosome stuff, plus really detailed archaeology from South America and some pretty cutting-edge computational models looking at Neanderthal anatomy.
Okay, let's dive in then. Let's unpack these sources and see what kind of new story emerges. Where should we start? Maybe with the Americas. This seems like a big shakeup.
Yeah, let's start there. The traditional story, the old map, as you called it.
Right, the one most of us learned.
Exactly. That was basically a single main migration after the big melt, the last glacial maximum, or LGM. The idea was people waited up in Beringia, then rushed south when the ice corridor opened.
But that's being seriously challenged now, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. There's this tension in the dating. A lot of the recent whole genome studies, they still lean towards a post-LGM dispersal. But earlier studies, especially initial mtDNA work, using different ways to calculate the molecular clockways calibrated with really old Paleolithic fossils, they suggested maybe an entry around 30,000 years ago.
30,000. So way before the LGM ice sheets were supposedly this impenetrable barrier.
Precisely. It kind of neatly avoids that whole how did they get past the ice problem if they were already south of it or moving along the coast, perhaps.
And the archaeology, is it backing up these earlier dates? I mean, finding actual sites is key, right?
It is, and we're seeing finds that really push back the dates. We know humans were up in the Siberian Arctic around 30,000 years ago, maybe even earlier, like 45,000. So people were definitely mobile in the region back then.
Okay, so the potential source population was there early.
Yes. And then in the Americas itself, well, you have sites like Chiquihuite Cave in central Mexico. That's dated to about 30,000 years ago.
Wow.
Then there's evidence from the Colorado Plateau suggesting people were there more than 36,000 years ago.
Even older.
Potentially, yes. And White Sands in New Mexico, those footprints, dated between 24,000 and 17,000 years ago. Bluefish Caves up in Canada, around 24,000. And Monteverde down in Chile.
Monteverde, that's always been a key early site.
Still is. Dates there are pushing 16,000, maybe 18,000 years ago. And then you mentioned Arroyo Seco, too.
Yeah, way down south in Argentina. What does that tell us?
Well, it shows people hunting extinct megafauna giant sloths, those huge armadillos called glyptodons, extinct horses, 14,000 years ago.
14,000 years ago at the tip of South America.
Exactly. Think about the speed that implies. To get from Beringia, or wherever the entry point was, all the way down there, it just doesn't fit that slow post-ice corridor model. It had to be faster, maybe earlier.
So the physical evidence is really stacking up against the old timeline. But what about the genetics within South America? Because you mentioned earlier, it wasn't just continuous settlement. Something dramatic happened.
Oh, absolutely. This is where it gets really interesting. Forget the simple models based just on North America. When you look deep into South America, you see this profound, well, they call it a genetic reset.
A reset, meaning the original populations were replaced.
Largely, yes, especially in certain regions between about 4,000 and 2,000 years ago. It's like whole genetic lines just disappeared.
Like ghosts in the genome.
Kind of. Look at the Checwa site in Colombia, the people living there 6,000 years ago. Their genetic signature is basically a ghost lineage. It has absolutely zero contribution to modern groups in the area.
None at all. So completely replaced.
Completely replaced by new groups like the ancestors of Chibchan speakers and probably moving down from Central America. Same story, different place. In Brazil, Lagoa Santa.
Right, the 9,000-year-old skeletons from there.
Yeah, their genomes are totally distinct from modern people in that region. They vanished too.
Why? What drove this replacement? Were these early groups just outcompeted, or was it something else?
Well, the sources suggest something they call the paradox of purity. It's a fascinating, if tragic, idea.
Paradox of purity. Explain that.
So, populations like the one at Chakua seem to have been quite isolated for millennia. This meant they maintained their genetic distinctiveness, their purity, if you will.
Okay. Stable for a long time.
Very stable, but that isolation came at a cost. It led to extremely low diversity in their HLA genes.
The HLA. It's the immune system stuff, right? Human leukocyte antigens.
Exactly. It's crucial for recognizing and fighting off diseases. If your population has very low HLA diversity, everyone basically has the same limited toolkit to fight infections. A new disease comes along.
And it could sweep through the whole population because nobody has the right defenses.
Precisely. And the archaeological evidence from Chikwa seems to support this. The skeletal remains show signs of chronic infections, like jawbone abscesses, dental problems, even signs of malnutrition. They seem to have been biologically quite fragile.
So when these new groups, like the Herero people associated with the Chibchen expansion, arrived with perhaps higher genetic diversity,
They were likely just more resilient, better adapted, maybe better able to cope with local pathogens or environmental stresses. It suggests that sometimes mixing, bringing in new diversity is actually key to survival. Isolation can be a death sentence.
it's a powerful evolutionary lesson. But was this replacement story universal across South America? Or were there places where these ancient lineages held on?
Good question. No, it wasn't universal. The picture is complex, regional. For instance, work in central Argentina in the Pampas region
Right.
found a previously unknown, really deep lineage that showed remarkable continuity. It persisted for something like 8,000 years, for maybe 8,500 years ago, right up until about 150 years ago.
8 millennia. So in some places, stability and continuity, while in others, like Colombia, total replacement.
Exactly. It shows just how much regional variation there was. Long-term stability here, catastrophic collapse there.
Okay, so that's a really different picture of the Americas. Early arrival, rapid spread, deep isolation, and then in some cases, this dramatic reset driven perhaps by a lack of diversity. Now, let's pivot. Let's look at another ancient human group facing huge environmental challenges, the Neanderthals, and specifically that distinctive face. What was it for?
Right. It's a classic paleoanthropology puzzle. That big projecting mid-face, the large nose. Was it about biting hard, coping with ice age cold, or something else?
And we can actually test these ideas now with computers.
You can, using really sophisticated methods like finite element analysis FEA, basically stress testing a virtual skull in computational fluid dynamics, CFD, which simulates airflow. Researchers built digital models of Neanderthal, modern human, and Homo heidelbergensis skulls.
Heidelbergensis being an important comparison group, kind of an ancestor or a close relative.
Exactly, a crucial outgroup. And they tested the main hypotheses.
Okay, hypothesis 1. The face was built for heavy biting, especially with the front teeth. What did the stress tests show?
Basically, rejected. The FEA models didn't show the Neanderthal face was significantly better at handling high bite forces on the front teeth compared to modern humans. They were strong, sure, but the facial structure wasn't uniquely adapted for that, it seems.
Okay, so not primarily for biting. What about hypothesis 2? Conditioning cold, dry, ice age air. That big nose acting like a radiator or humidifier.
This one got some support, but it's nuanced. The CFD airflow simulations showed that, yes, the Neanderthal nasal cavity was adapted for warming and humidifying air better than Heidelbergensis.
Ah, so an improvement.
An improvement, definitely an adaptation to cold, but here's the twist. It was actually slightly less efficient at it than the modern human noses, maybe 8 to 10% less effective.
Really? So our noses are actually better at warming cold air than the classic cold-adapted Neanderthal nose?
According to these simulations, yes. It suggests both lineages were evolving cold adaptations, perhaps in slightly different ways, but ours turned out to be a bit more efficient for that specific task.
Okay, so if it wasn't mainly for biting and only moderately good for cold air, what else could explain that unique facial structure? What's hypothesis 3?
High energetic demands and the need for massive amounts of ventilation. Basically, they needed big noses just to breathe enough air to fuel their bodies.
To breathe enough.
Yeah, this hypothesis got the strongest support. The researchers calculated the volume of the Neanderthal nasal passage. It was huge, about 29% larger on average than in modern humans.
29% bigger.
And the CFD models predicted how much air they could move. The Neanderthal setup could potentially move almost twice the volume of air per minute compared to us, something like 50 liters per minute versus our average of maybe 27.
Wow, double the airflow. Why would they need that?
To fuel their incredibly high energy needs, living in the cold, being very active hunters and foragers. Their estimated daily calorie needs were enormous, maybe up to 4,500 kilocalories a day.
That's huge.
It is, and to burn those calories, you need oxygen, lots of it. So the argument is their facial structure, particularly the large nasal aperture and cavity, was primarily driven by the need to get massive amounts of air in just to sustain their metabolism and activity levels. Breathing efficiency trumped biting or even optimizing for cold air conditioning, it seems.
So the face shape wasn't just about the external environment, like cold, but about their internal engine, their metabolism.
Exactly. It reflects their whole physiological package. But what's also fascinating is that this isn't just about adaptation during life. It seems to be baked into their developmental genetics.
Ah, so we're finding the genetic switches that actually built this face.
Well, starting to, yes. Researchers have identified specific genetic variants, little changes in the DNA sequence that Neanderthals had near a really important gene called SOX9.
SOX9. I know that's involved in bone and cartilage development, right?
Critically involved. And these Neanderthal variants weren't in the gene itself, but in a nearby regulatory region, an enhancer cluster they call EC1.45. This region acts like a dimmer switch for SOX9.
Okay, so it controls how much or when SOX9 is turned on.
Precisely. An experiment showed that the Neanderthal versions of these switches actually increase the activity of this enhancer in the types of cells that build the face and jaw early in development.
So Neanderthal embryos might have gotten a bigger boost of SOX9 activity in their developing phases.
That's the implication. More SOX9 activity could lead to changes in how cartilage precursors form, potentially explaining things like the Neanderthal jaw shape, that retromolar gap behind the last molar, maybe the angle of the jaw, features linked to that overall facial structure.
It's amazing. A few tiny changes in regulatory DNA, possibly driving these significant anatomical differences linked to breathing and energy needs.
It connects the dots beautifully, from the large-scale anatomy and physiology right down to the specific genetic mechanisms.
Okay, so let's recap. We've covered a lot of ground, 30,000 years or more. From these really early, rapid migrations into the Americas, the shocking disappearance of entire lineages in South America.
The genetic reset.
Right. And then shifting to our Neanderthal cousins, using computation to figure out their faces were less about biting, maybe less about cold than we thought, and more about just breathing huge amounts of air.
Fueled by specific genetic tweaks affecting development.
It highlights two really different evolutionary stories, doesn't it?
It really does. On one hand, you have populations like Chekwa in the Americas where isolation, that purity, ultimately seems to have led to fragility and complete replacement, a genetic dead end.
Erased.
But with Neanderthals, while they disappeared as a distinct group, it wasn't a complete erasure. They interbred with modern humans. They didn't vanish. They became part of us. Their genes, including maybe some of those facial development regulators, are still carried by many people today.
So the American story, in places like Chekwa, suggests that genetic purity, that isolation, can be a pathway to extinction.
It certainly looks that way in that case.
Yet we carry genes from Neanderthals, who were definitely genetically distinct from the African populations extending out. So what does that contrast tell us? That fragility of the pure Chekwa versus the partial persistence of the distinct Neanderthal within us. Does it point towards diversity, even diversity gained from archaic relatives, as the key to long-term human resilience?
That's a really provocative thought to end on. Is resilience ultimately found in mixing, in absorbing difference rather than maintaining purity? Something definitely worth mulling over as you look at these deep histories.